Right now, somewhere in a museum, there's a 2,500-year-old wooden brazier with burn marks on the inside and chemical residue that archaeologists have confirmed is cannabis. And the wild part isn't that ancient people were smoking cannabis. The wild part is that this is probably not even close to the first time humans ever smoked something. This video is about the actual origin of smoking. Not cigarettes, not tobacco, not the guy outside every bar who always seems to know everyone. We're talking about the very first time a human being intentionally inhaled burning plant material and decided to do it again. And here's what most people get completely wrong about this. They assume the story starts with tobacco. It doesn't. Not even close. Tobacco is a latecomer, a regional plant that didn't reach most of the world until after 1492. The real story goes back tens of thousands of years before that, and it starts the same way almost every great human discovery starts, by accident. Let's start with the most obvious thing in the world that nobody thinks about. For hundreds of thousands of years, every human being who ever lived sat next to a fire. Every single day. Fire was warmth, protection, cooking, light. It was everything. And fire produces smoke. Constant, unavoidable, get it in your eyes and lungs smoke. The oldest confirmed evidence of controlled fire dates back roughly 1 million years, from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. That wasn't even Homo sapiens. That was Homo erectus, our earlier ancestor, sitting in a cave, breathing smoke, every single day. Now here's the thing nobody talks about. Not all smoke is the same. When you burn wood, you get carbon and water vapor. Fine. Boring. But when you burn certain plants, you get something very different. You get a chemical cocktail. Alkaloids, terpenes, psychoactive compounds that interact directly with the human nervous system. Some of our ancestors were accidentally getting high around the campfire, and they had absolutely no idea why some nights just felt better than others. This isn't fringe speculation. Researchers have proposed for decades that early humans living near forests full of aromatic and psychoactive plants would have been regularly exposed to their smoke. Cannabis grows naturally across Central Asia. Wild tobacco species exist across the Americas. Psychoactive plants are not rare. They're everywhere. And fire was a daily constant. Here's the part that makes this genuinely fascinating. The human brain has receptors that respond to cannabinoids. These receptors didn't evolve because of cannabis. They're part of our endocannabinoid system, which regulates mood, memory, and appetite. But their existence means that when a human first inhaled smoke from a burning cannabis plant, their brain wasn't confused. Their brain recognized it immediately. The first accidental high wasn't an alien experience. It felt like something the body already understood. And that moment, repeated enough times, with enough people noticing that certain smoke from certain plants made the evening feel different, that's probably where intentional smoking begins. Not a plan, not an invention, just a pattern that got noticed and then repeated. But that's the accidental origin. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Because before people had pipes, before they had bowls or tubes or any dedicated smoking device, there's a good chance they were using a method so simple it almost doesn't count as a method at all. You take an enclosed space, a tent, a cave, a low shelter. You heat stones until they glow. You throw aromatic plant material directly onto those stones. And then you sit inside and breathe. No pipe required, no specialized tool, just hot rocks and the right plant. We know this worked because we have a written account of it from 2,500 years ago. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, described a group called the Scythians, nomadic people from the Eurasian steppe, doing exactly this with hemp. They set up small enclosed tents, superheated stones, threw hemp seeds and plant material onto those stones, and sat inside inhaling the smoke. Herodotus wrote that they would, and I'm quoting here, howl with pleasure. For centuries, historians assumed he was exaggerating, that he'd misunderstood some mundane ritual and made it sound exotic. Then archaeologists started excavating Scythian burial mounds. They found bronze braziers, heated stones, hemp residue, exactly what Herodotus described. The man wasn't embellishing, he was reporting. He was, if anything, underselling it. And this tells us something important. By 500 BC, intentional cannabis smoking wasn't new. It was established enough that it showed up in burial rituals. Established enough that a Greek historian traveling through the region thought it was worth documenting. You don't write down things that are brand new and confusing in the same calm, matter-of-fact tone that Herodotus uses. This was already a known thing, which means the actual origin goes back further. We just don't have the physical evidence yet. But that's worth pausing on, because the absence of older evidence doesn't mean it didn't happen earlier. Organic material almost never survives thousands of years underground. We find stone tools from 3 million years ago because stone is indestructible. A wooden pipe packed with dried herbs, gone in a few centuries under normal conditions. A leather pouch of cannabis seeds, dissolved back into the earth long before any archaeologist arrived with a trowel. The archaeological record for ancient smoking is almost certainly a tiny fraction of what actually happened. Now let's talk about tobacco, because this is where most people think the story begins, and it's actually one of the most interesting twists in the whole thing. Tobacco is native to the Americas. Full stop. Europe, Africa, Asia, and Australia had never encountered it until European contact in the late 15th century. When Columbus arrived in the Caribbean in 1492, his crew watched indigenous people walking around with small burning rolls of dried leaves, inhaling the smoke and exhaling it through their noses and mouths. His crew was baffled. His crew also tried it within weeks, because of course they did. But tobacco use in the Americas is far older than 1492. Chemical residues from tobacco have been found in ancient pipes dating back at least 3,500 years in the southeastern United States. Some researchers believe it goes back considerably further, possibly 10,000 years or more, tied to early cultivation in the Amazon basin. And here's the part that almost never gets mentioned. In 2019, researchers found a hearth in the Great Salt Lake Desert in Utah, roughly 12,000 years old, containing concentrated seeds from a wild tobacco species, not seeds that had blown in by accident, deliberately placed. This predates any known pipe or pottery in the region by thousands of years. People were putting tobacco into fires 12,000 years ago. Whether they were inhaling the smoke directly, using it for ritual purposes, or both, we don't know for certain. But the deliberate placement matters. This wasn't random. Someone knew what that plant was and chose to burn it. That's important. But if you think tobacco in ancient America was anything like how we think of smoking today, you're missing the most interesting part of the story. In many indigenous cultures across the Americas, tobacco was not recreational, it was sacred. Shamans used it to open channels between the living and the spirit world. Blowing smoke on someone was an act of blessing. The smoke itself was considered a living messenger, carrying prayers upward and bringing visions back down. Tobacco use was disciplined, ritualized, treated with deep reverence. The idea of tobacco as a casual, everyday habit, something you do on a lunch break or while waiting for the bus, is almost entirely a European invention, and a fairly recent one at that. When something is sacred, you don't chain smoke it. You treat it carefully. You use it with intention. That's how tobacco functioned for thousands of years in the cultures that cultivated it. So now we have cannabis in Central Asia, tobacco in the Americas, and 1,000,000 years of humans breathing smoke around campfires. And here's the question that ties it all together. Was smoking invented once? Or did it happen everywhere, independently, over and over again? The evidence strongly points to the second option. Different continents, different plants, different tools, different rituals. Communities in the Americas, in Eurasia, in Africa, all appear to have experimented with their local plants separately over long stretches of time. There was no single inventor of smoking, no one moment when the idea spread from a single source across the globe. Smoking appears to have been rediscovered over and over wherever humans lived near plants that produced interesting smoke. And that pattern tells us something deeper about human nature. Across virtually every culture ever documented, people have sought ways to alter their consciousness. They've drunk fermented beverages, eaten psychedelic mushrooms, chewed plant leaves, inhaled smoke. This behavior is so universal, so persistent, so independent across cultures that some researchers believe it isn't accidental. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, proposed in the 1980s that the pursuit of altered states is a fundamental drive, biologically embedded in human behavior. Not a cultural quirk, a feature. And here's the twist that almost nobody considers when they think about the history of smoking. The smoke itself might not have been the point. Think about what happens when a group of people gather around fragrant, psychoactive smoke. You share an experience, you feel it together. The ritual creates a boundary between ordinary time and something different. It marks the moment as significant. Smoke rising upward becomes a physical metaphor for something leaving the ordinary world and entering something larger. The smoke was the technology, but the real product was the shared experience around it. Gathering around aromatic smoke could reinforce rituals, strengthen group identity, and create memorable moments that bonded communities across generations. The earliest smoking might not have been about the high at all. It might have been about the gathering, the fire, the circle, the moment when everyone present was doing the same thing, breathing the same air, experiencing the same shift. That reframe changes everything. It makes smoking less a vice and more a social technology, one of the oldest ones we have. If this kind of deep dive into how humans actually lived is your thing, there's a lot more where this came from on this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we go to some genuinely strange corners of history, and the comment section on these videos tends to produce some of the best follow-up questions I've ever seen. Drop yours below. What plant do you think your specific ancestors were burning 10,000 years ago? I'm genuinely curious what people come up with. So here's where we land. The first thing ancient humans ever smoked was almost certainly different depending on where they lived. A hunter in Ice Age Europe might have inhaled juniper or pine resin thrown onto hot stones. Someone in prehistoric Central Asia was experimenting with cannabis in an enclosed tent while the stones glowed red. People in the Americas were placing wild tobacco seeds into fires 12,000 years ago, long before any pipe existed to formalize the act. There was no single first smoke, no one moment of invention. Instead, smoking appears to have emerged over and over independently wherever curious humans lived near plants that produced interesting smoke and fires hot enough to release them, which makes the history of smoking less a discovery and more a reflection. Every time it happened, in every corner of the world, it revealed the same thing about the people doing it. They were paying attention to the world around them, they were experimenting, they were gathering together and sharing what they found. That impulse, the one that made someone thousands of years ago think to throw a particular plant onto hot stones and lean in to see what happened, that's the same impulse that built everything else we've ever made. Human curiosity doesn't need a pipe. It just needs a fire.